Hi, welcome to JupyterLab / Jupyter Notebook Dev meeting for December 16th, 2016. I think there's several people that are going to be out, or work is going to slow down from several people over the next couple of weeks for holidays. Brian said he was going to pick up work, so I think one major focus of this meeting is transitioning to Brian and others that'll be working over the holiday from people that might be taking some time off over the next couple of weeks. So keep that in mind when you status reports that we'll probably have questions, or try to put enough information in there to sort of transition work over to people that might be picking it up. How about let's start with Steve and Darian.
I can go first. I've just been continuing work on the state restoration stuff. There was a bug that wasn't visible unless you had your console open. That's now resolved. But more fundamentally, the PR that just went in a couple of days ago just makes it a lot simpler for plugin authors to take advantage of state restoration. But since then, I've had sort of a change in the model that restoration, the life cycle of the restoration is going to follow. Steve and I talked through this yesterday, and basically the idea is you're a plugin author, and you are going to be adding plugins to adding widgets to the application shell. If you're going to do that, if you're not just writing some sort of plugin that's meant to be used by others, then you have a responsibility to hook into layout restoration. So the way you do that is each widget that you create, you add it to an instance tracker, and you import the global instance restorer and just pass your tracker into that, and you're done. The only work you have to do to upkeep it is whenever new widgets are created, you make sure you add them to your tracker. And if something changes one of your widgets, you call tracker.save and give it your widget so that it updates itself. So there's basically 2 or 3 things that you need to take care of, and then layout magically works for you. Now, what the instance restorer does is it takes all of those trackers that the plugins gave it, waits for all of them to be ready and have reinstantiated their widgets. Once all of those widgets are reinstantiated, then it can take the next step and say, okay, they're all restored. Now, application, go relay out all the things based on the saved dehydrated state. So then the application internally is going to have some logic that I haven't yet written, where it will take all of these widgets that it knows all this information about because they've been saved, and it's going to relay them out in the correct places. And the application will emit a restored promise in case somebody's waiting for the application to be restored before they do stuff. So the application is going to have 2 promises people can wait for. One is called started, which just means all the plugins exist, and one is called restored, which means all of the layout has been correctly relayed out. So that new life cycle is what I'm working on now. So the version that's published recently has a thing inside it called layout restorer, but that's gone because really layout restoration is a responsibility of the application. So the new PR that I have open that I'm working on has 2 public things. One's an instance tracker, which we've had all along, and one's an instance restorer, which is this new thing that used to be called layout restorer. Yeah, I guess that's sort of the new conceptual model. I had written a bunch of docs in the doc strings laying out the old life cycle, and a lot of it still applies, but I'll make sure that when this PR comes in, it has a fully documented step-by-step of what events happen when, so that you could hook into whichever promises you care about. And each one of these gives you promises that you can listen to. So each tracker can give you a promise for when it's restored, The instance restorer can give you a promise for when all the widgets are in the page but not yet relayed out, and the application can give you a promise for when everything's fully laid out. So that's the current plan.
Do you have a rough
actually,
timeline
today's my last day for December, so it's not happening until early January. But you probably won't notice very much because most of the restorations are already sort of happening at the best level we can support now, except for sidebars. So all you'll really notice when this new model's in place is that the sidebars will also save their state, because until Phosphor gives me the way to rehydrate the dock panel, you're not going to see the full manifestation of this. But actually, the groundwork that I'm doing now is a necessary step for that anyway. So hopefully what'll happen is that we'll just be ready for that when it's available. The other consideration here is I want to make sure that this is really super fault tolerant because because of the obvious reason, right? If you refresh your page and stuff is worse than before, that is really annoying. So I want to make sure that the worst possible thing that happens is that maybe something doesn't reopen up, but never any errors, and hopefully not even stuff not opening up. But yeah, so there are some spots where I think. So, for example, I rely on local storage. Local storage can be corrupted by others, so I think I need to be defensive about what I read from there. I already did an audit of all the commands, but as people write new commands, they need to make sure commands are promises. So they need to make sure those promises are actually returning things if they need to be returning things. So if your command calls another command, make sure you return that command because that command is also a promise, because restoration completely relies on promises. So if the chain is broken somewhere, restoration can't gracefully fail. Those sorts of things. But I'm trying to audit them and catch at least all the plugins that we have, so that when we see other plugins break, we'll know how to diagnose them. That's it for me. That was a little long-winded. Sorry.
One question I have. I could imagine some plugins don't themselves create widgets, but they monitor the creation of other widgets and trigger actions based on those. One example would be the real-time collaboration plugin, which would watch for notebooks or text areas that are created, and once they're created, would enable real-time collaboration for them. Will that rehydration process trigger the right events such that those other things can happen?
Well, I would imagine what you should probably do in that situation is say, wait for the app restored promise to resolve, and then you've already imported, say, the editor widget tracker, and do tracker.forEach, and then for each of those widgets you can do something and know it's in the right spot. So I think every step should be, everything should have a hook that lets you do stuff at whatever stage you need.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Brian, that's a good question. I've been trying to keep an eye on what Darian's doing for that reason. I don't have a good story on that right now, but for instance, if it happens quickly enough, your OAuth token may still be valid, and then that should be doable. But if it doesn't, it's possible that you would need to reauthorize and other such things. So there's probably not going to be a way to make it 100% bulletproof, but you could probably get most of the way there.
Okay.
Another thing is that it might even be the case that right now it's up to the plugin author to give me a function that generates a unique name for each widget and a function that generates the args necessary to relaunch that widget and the command to use. So it might actually be the case that the args themselves will contain all the state that the real-time collaboration needs. It might have the token in the args or whatever. That might be what actually gets rehydrated, so that you won't have to do a bunch of work after stuff is there, it'll be upon instantiation that the work is done. It's not clear. I mean, I think it'll be different by use case, but every stage is hookable.
Yep.
Fantastic.
I'd just like to add, when we move to TypeScript 2.1, all this promise stuff, we'll be able to use async and await for it, which might make the some of the promise chaining nicer. Just FYI.
I'm not sure I buy that story so much, partly because
it's not a silver bullet.
Yeah. Well, no, not even that. It's just that for this particular use case, it actually seems like promises are nicer because async and await are much more, they seem better for unitary actions. This is specifically, I want multiple promises and I want to see that chain. That,
right.
And also the ES5 code that's generated by that is just impossible to debug. I would say for as long as our compilation target is ES5, that seems like a not great thing to encumber ourselves with. Like once we have browsers that can take ES6, then maybe.
I think we could take a look at it. I think once we can set our baseline at browsers that handle generators, the generated code is way better than the browsers that can't handle generators. But that's where the complexity is in the generators. And I mean, async await doesn't mean promises go away. They're just syntactic sugar on top of promises. So I'm saying from the point of view of plugin authors using these APIs that have promises, that might be simpler once we have async await. But I agree, it's not a silver bullet. I was playing around with it with IPyWidgets, and there's a lot of places where I thought, oh, cool, we could use async await. Oh, wait, it doesn't really help us any, and it just complicates the code a little more. So, but anyway, that's a bridge that we haven't crossed yet, and we'll cross in due time, I'm sure. Steve?
Okay. In general, just trying to keep up with beta issues, refactoring, writing tests where there weren't any, improving that technical debt as we approach beta. Couple issues for discussion is as I was cleaning up the implementation of the code mirror code editor implementation and writing tests for that, and I realized way too late in the game that the code mirror doc object actually contains things that are closely tied to a specific editor, and the ramification being there, you can't have our use case was to be able to basically show your own cursors and then other people's cursors as another marker, but you can't do that the way the doc is structured. So taking a step back, I thought, okay, what's the least we can put in the model so that it will work for any editor? And in doing that, it turned out to be just which cursors are associated with it, and then let who owns them come out in the wash. The value, the actual observable string, and then the MIME type. So those are what define the model. And if we do that, then a cell model as well as a document model could implement those interfaces, and then those could be consumed by the code editor implementation. And from a cleanliness perspective, we only have now we have avoided a duplicate string that we were carrying around. So for larger documents in memory, we already saved there, and conceptually it collapses the number of distinct objects we have. So I think it's actually a win from doing this. Leave the code mirror pieces in the editor part and make the model a more editor agnostic thing. And I think it actually will be a win. So yeah, if anyone wants to chime in on that, I asked for opinions on the issue there. I linked it on the HackPad.
So what are we now using an observable string for the model?
Yes.
And what's the API of that observable string? I know initially it was very coarse grained.
Yeah, it's almost exactly the Google Drive API. So Ian implemented that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I think this will be a win overall doing this.
Yeah, I think that sounds really like a good approach.
Right, so that's the entire model for an editor. The observable string, a cursor's data structure of some sort,
Right.
and
The metadata.
and the MIME type, yeah.
MIME
the
type.
metadata.
MIME type.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we could attach metadata on there if we wanted to make it a little bigger. But
that's great.
Yeah, so a cell model already is that, as well as a document in our iDocument model.
And so you have the CodeMirror editor listening to changes on the string and copying things over, but the doc is still with the editor now. You're not separating the CodeMirror doc from the editor.
Yeah. For our use case, you cannot use a CodeMirror doc for multiple editors because we want the cursors to be unique. So it's unfortunate, but I think in the end it's a win.
Okay. Cool.
Next,
anything else
related to editors is the way Microsoft has packaged Monaco. It's fine, but it's stuck in the old window.define is available. And I just fielded a question on Bokeh this morning where window.define was wrecking something they were trying to do in the notebook. So I really think we don't want to have that on the page. We need to stick to a hard line there and not have window.define available.
It feels to me like, just looking at that code, it feels to me like they have not really tried to make it a clean third-party component in places. They just took what they had and did sort of minimal stuff. I haven't looked at it very carefully, but that's what it feels like, just glancing at it.
The example is called integration, but it's more like, if your whole page basically is this thing, then you can integrate it. And oh, by the way, you have to use require.js on the window, which I think was a half measure stance at this point. I think they can do better. So the question is, do we want to defer then having that until such time as it is more friendlier to web packing or not using window.require?
Well, our friends that are working on this are putting in issues to Monaco, right, to try to get it to be packaged better.
So there is an open issue about Webpack uses, but just whether it gets traction.
Yeah. So let's.
I would say Monaco is not a must. It was nice to have. The abstraction was what we were really trying to go after.
Yes, that is certainly a win. And 1.0 was supposed to be feature parity with the notebook, and that includes a CodeMirror editor. So there's no rush to, and I don't think this early in the game we should be willing to give up window.require for this.
Yeah, I agree. So it sounds like blocked on Monaco. Our friends are working on it. They've got it working in their product with minimal escape patches. It sounds like, and okay, that sounds great.
Yeah, they've got a way to work it in their integration in their application, but in order to do that, they have to give up window.require, which I don't think we want to do.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last thing is Almar had a PR proof of concept to be able to do Flex plugins. So you could author a JupyterLab plugin from Flex, and it turned out to be the nuggets that were needed. The changes were the ability for a JupyterLab extension to give back config data to the page, and we had already Dan Allen had already sort of did a workaround for Jupyter Hub to be able to get config data onto the page. So this is data that's in our script tag of here's Jupyter config data. That it's a JSON blob that you can extract values from. So now Jupyter lab extensions can provide data to that. And then the other piece that was needed was a Flex needed to be able to add handlers. And the existing method for that was to do a server extension. But there's no reason that a lab extension couldn't also provide a hook for that as part of its lab extension. So if it's a Python-based lab extension, it has the ability to provide config data, and it can get a handle on the Tornado app to be able to add handlers to it. So Flex would do both of those things. So it could be that we decide no later on. These are distinct things the way the notebook has, where there's the client side only and the JavaScript side, the server side only. But for now, I think unless there's pushback, I think this is a valid thing where a lab extension can work from either end.
Is the point here to simplify so that you're installing handlers and everything just from the lab extension install?
Right. So you only have to install one thing. It is a lab extension, not a lab extension and a server extension.
Is that I think it's really important that the configuration of a Jupyter server is something that works across to all possible front ends that would be connecting to that server. And so I'm really Interact is a great example of that, where I don't, I think we really want to view the server as something that has absolutely nothing to do with JupyterLab, and it needs to be configured completely separately. And so if what you're proposing is to enable a JupyterLab extension to modify the server by its installation, I'm probably not. I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay, that's fair.
Now, one thing that does exist is a single Python package can declare a server extension, a lab extension, even an NB extension. And so there's nothing preventing someone from having a single Python package that installs all of those types of things. I just don't think we should go the extra step and automate the installation of the server part based on the installation of the lab or NB extension part.
Yeah, I would say keep in mind that on the roadmap is a conf-d type installation, so that there aren't extra steps, that the package installation actually is installing these extensions. But I think one caveat with that is this a particular server extension that does not make sense for the notebook? Like, it's extending the handlers for the server, but do those only make sense in the context of the lab plugin? Or would that make sense in the context of other, like the notebook and other apps that may be running from the server?
Or will the server endpoints just not be hit if it's notebook? If
Yeah,
it's the
I mean,
classic notebook.
it's possible if you do JupyterLab, you want to do specific configuration of things that are only going to be accessible from lab. But if you do Jupyter Notebook, then it's a different server configuration.
Yeah, and that use was what prompted me to make it a separate thing. But I can see where you're coming from, Brian, where they should be separate things. So it could be that it's a lab server extension.
Yeah.
But the issue is and the reason I'm giving back a Tornado app is that depending on how you launch JupyterLab, you're either getting a notebook app or a lab app.
Yeah.
And that was why
already
I'm just going to
having a distinction. And it may be in the future we do Jupyter space server -- lab or something. And like that is a good point, Brian. We have already a distinction between Jupyter Notebook and JupyterLab from the application standpoint.
Well, but I think in the long run, both lab and notebook will be server extensions themselves.
Right. And so then it would be Jupyter server -- lab and JupyterLab, which is just a convenience for Jupyter server -- lab. But even in that case, I can see you saying there's lab extensions that only want to extend the server handlers in the context of running lab.
No, I think a given configuration of the Jupyter server will have a fixed set of server extensions. Like I don't think we should try to invent like profiles or something on top of our config system already. Like if you need a different configured server, create a different configuration for it and install a different set of extensions for that configuration.
Is there any chance that we stop using Tornado? Like, is it actually dangerous to be passing the Tornado app or making it accessible to the extension author? Or is that like a safe thing in general?
I think as long as we're using Python, we'll be using Tornado. I think the only thing that would change that was if we rewrote the server using Node.
Yeah, but
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Security-wise, though, right? If you have a malicious extension, it could monkey patch Tornado and listen to all credentials, and I mean, presumably it could do anything it wanted. So we need to make sure that the assumption here is that the extension is trusted.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
And if we, that's another reason, I guess, to make the server extension step completely separate from the lab extension step, because then the lab extension could be maybe trusted a little bit less. I guess you have JavaScript code that's being injected into the page and stuff, so there is still an element of trust.
The
Might be
other
the same
factor,
attack surface.
I think the other factor is that the installation and configuration of extensions is already pretty nasty, and I'm hesitant to introduce new abstractions that don't fully fix it. I think the eventual fix will be to move towards this conf.d style approach, but
where there's no installation step. Yeah.
Well, there's still, I think even in that approach, there's still going to be a separation between installation and enabling.
Right. Sure.
But yeah, there's no,
separate copying files step.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think we should not invent new abstractions at this point.
Okay.
Can you remind us what Flex is, just real quick?
It's a library by Elmar Klein that allows you to write user interfaces in Python that show up in the browser. So he wrote a wrapper around that to make it you can make lab extensions in Python.
That's really cool. So does that mean there's a Python API for Phosphor and?
Not yet.
Use Phosphor components and stuff.
Yeah, he's sort of hacking. There will be a cleaner way to import modules that right now is sort of brittle, but he's getting there.
Gotcha. Okay.
It is using Phosphor from Python. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Anything else?
This was a good use case of a strange extension that sort of forces us to take a step back and say, what is an extension?
And it certainly is going to come up in the future. I can imagine Bokeh, for example. I mean, the DAS stuff requires starting a Bokeh server, I think, which is essentially an endpoint that needs to be added to the server. And
right.
And I can imagine an astronomical Fitz viewer or something like this might be something that needs to communicate back and forth and needs to have its own extension point, so that there's server handler, so that it can communicate back and forth with a plugin. So yeah, I'm glad we're exploring it. Anything else?
Ian, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So last week I started working on a chat box widget. The idea being, if you're working if you're doing real-time collaboration with somebody, you may want to have more ephemeral messages passing back and forth. And the reason I started working on it was because it's sort of a simpler version of a notebook in that it's sort of a queue of things with strings in them. So that's, it currently looks terrible, but more or less works. I've been forging on with the notebook, and yesterday got a real-time notebook working, which Jamie can confirm. So at this point, I think there's an API which kind of works. I would say it's not done, but it kind of works. So I'm going to start ripping out some of the Google specific stuff and submit a work in progress API for what a real-time plugin would look like in the next day or two. So if people are not on vacation and care to give some feedback, that'd be useful in that.
That's awesome. I gave a talk at NYU at Spencer Lyons' Intro to Data Science essentially class, and talked about Jupyter and showed them 5 seconds of JupyterLab. And the first question that they asked is, can we do collaborative stuff like Google Docs? Said, we've got a postdoc working on this right now.
Great.
So fantastic.
Yeah, this is really impressive.
And then a related question is, and it's I wrote it in the hackpad, but when working on the chat box, I figure at some point it'd be nice to have a UI element which indicates different widgets are associated with each other in some way. And we've brought this up in different contexts, like if two things are hooked up to the same kernel. And there are a number of different places where that'd be a useful thing. So I wanted to, I guess, bring that to people's minds again to say, this widget is associated with that widget in some way, visually.
Along those lines, in SageMath Cloud, I believe their chat is sort of a per document chat, and then it's saved with the document. So anybody that's collaborating on that document can open the chat, and so it gives a sort of a topic of focus for the chat, and then it's preserved. It sounds like what the chat that you're talking about is really more just a playground for collaborative stuff. But if we could associate that chat with particular items and then save it so that it pops back up again, that may be really useful.
Right.
So I have a question about, or some thoughts about real-time collaboration in terms of, so right now it seems like the process to enable a particular model and view for real-time collaboration, someone would have to sort of hand write the adapter code between the sort of JupyterLab model and view and then the Google or other real-time backend models.
So not really at the moment. Or so the way that I've set it up is that I've tried to define a more abstract interface to the real-time collaboration, so that I mean, ultimately the goal is to also include our own implementation, which can talk through the server and have something like a Jupyter Hub implementation of the same thing. So I've been trying to target both of these at the same time. So right now the way it works is you spin up a handler, which gets associated with the document, either a document or some other contents model, because not everything is backed by a file. And each document then describes itself, says, I want a real-time version of a string, I want a real-time version of a vector, and tells the handler what it wants. And so that's the abstraction that I've been working with. And so that handler, currently I have an implementation of the Google version of that handler, but you could do other things.
Okay. And then, so my next question is, would it make sense to specify the structure of the model using a formal JSON specification? And so that basically to have a declarative representation of a particular real-time model that handler API can consume and produce a real-time model that has that specification.
That would be certainly interesting. I mean, possibly. I'd be curious to. I mean, we can take a look at it and talk more through it. I'd like to get what I do have in front of everybody's eyes.
Yeah.
And right now I can certainly get more granular about it with the notebook model that I've got up and running. Every time you make a change, it's sort of pushing the full JSON blob of the cell back and forth across the network, and we can certainly get more granular than that.
Yeah, and part of it is I'm wanting to avoid the classic n times m sort of adapter problems where you have n real-time backends and m models that want to use those backends. And I think all of it would be simplified greatly if we could have sort of a single declarative format for each of those models that any of the backends knew how to handle, and also even alternate front ends like Sage Math Cloud or Interact, or there may be a lot of extra miles that we get out of having sort of a common sort of centralized format. And part of what I think is starting to emerge is that the core data types, like an observable string or an observable list, are pretty invariant. Like there's going to be something like that in any real-time backend, and how the front end handles those objects may be different, but the abstractions I think are really sort of fairly universal.
Well, I think what Ian's doing, I mean, he has instead of a declarative format, he has a declarative API that you have to call.
Right.
And so that's, and then the format's just automating calling the API. So I think what you have is fine. It's a standard API that anybody can implement or call.
But part of what we're finding is having a truly declarative format for something allows you to do a lot of extra things like auto-generate APIs programmatically and guarantee that you're calling the API correctly, auto-generate tests, auto-generate documentation. Like you really, and part of it is I'm worried that when we tell plugin or lab extension authors, hey, if you want to enable real-time for your objects, here's what you have to do. Go learn about this API, go learn about, I think that's going to be difficult. Whereas if we tell them, write a JSON spec about your model and you're done.
I don't think anybody's arguing with you, Brian. I think we're just saying this is a fine first step.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
What I can say, one of the trickiest things that I have found in getting this to work is actually less getting the underlying model correct, but more rehooking up all the various signals for on this changed, on that changed in a way that I'm continues to work.
Yes, that's hooking up to nested trees of collaborative or observable objects is that's definitely the hard part. No, and I want to be clear. I think what you're doing is really spectacular, and it sounds like incredible progress. And I don't. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not downplaying that, but
I think we'll get there. I have to go in about 10 minutes. So, Ian, was there anything else, or?
No, that's the main thing.
Okay. I've been working on iPad widgets, and so is Sylvan. We decided in the end to rewrite the tab and accordion widgets as true phosphor widgets when we were realizing that there was a lot of sort of mixing of trying to deal with phosphor from the iPad widgets code, et cetera. So what we did is we have a tab widget, an accordion widget, and looking at other widgets that may need to just move to phosphor directly and then have a light wrapper around with iPad widgets. But we've been triaging and just trying to push forward on iPad widget 6. Someone's been working a ton with embedding widgets in static documentation or in Sphinx output, and is making some good progress there and handling some of the issues dealing with state and saving state in a notebook. So making really good progress on iPad widgets is what we've been doing in our current goal here. Brian, you've got quite a list of things. I might have to leave early, but
yeah, I think I can get through most of this quickly. So I've already talked about the RTC stuff. So I'm going to be teaching starting in January, like January 10th. I'm going to have everything set up to teach with the classic notebook. And when and if JupyterLab is ready for me to start using with the students during the quarter, I can do that. But part of my goal over the holiday is to take another pass at the GitHub issues for JupyterLab and basically try to understand where we're at in terms of a beta release in January or February. I'm also going to do, along with that, another sort of UI UX design review to try to get a sense of what are the main usability issues that we really need to fix for the beta. It would probably be good if someone else could take the lead on at least heading up the API, sort of the code side of that. Obviously, I don't think we need to have API stability for the beta, but I know there's a lot of ongoing work that sort of at the level of the APIs that we probably do want to have settled by the beta. And I'm just not up on that. But if I don't know who
yeah, that's been part of my push over the past few weeks, Brian, was cleaning up all of the APIs using the phosphor data structures uniformly, et cetera, making sure everything's documented.
Fantastic. Do you want to open up issues on the remaining ones and tag them with a beta milestone? I mean, they may already be done. I don't.
No, yeah, I already did a full sweep. So there was a PR that said, "This is the end. I'm closing the API issue for beta."
Nice.
So we still have some tweaks left around editors. So that's sort of the last remaining ugliness. Getting that sorted out.
We're good for beta as far as API goes? API
yes,
changes?
once the editor part is settled down, the cell editor specifically, I was going to use the Monaco PR to tease out what we can factor out of that, because they're actually wanting to provide their own completion widget, things like that. So things around editor are really all that's remaining API wise for beta. And then for me, the other beta major issue is lab extension compatibility. So we have a beta issue tracking that.
Okay. And then the other is just for us to think more broadly, sort of what else do we know that we want to have done for the beta. One that Jason, you and I have talked about quite a bit is the only having one active code mirror per notebook. What's the status with that one?
Yeah, who's been using it with big notebooks? I know we've done a lot of things to try to mitigate that. I'm not sure how frustrating it is.
The skinny is we did make an attempt at that. The problem is CodeMirror, the run mode, doesn't handle the gutters or the line numbers.
That's right.
And there's no programmatic way to get the information to match the style that was applied to those things. So I went down the path of trying to recreate the gutters myself, but I was having to hack in the private element styles in order to do that.
Now this is
so while we can render a CodeMirror cell, it's not going to have the gutters.
So
as you click on it, it will change mode, it will visibly alter itself.
What we do now is for the particularly intensive operations, like the resizing that caused a complete CodeMirror refresh, we throttle those quite a bit. And so that seemed to help a lot with like dragging a tab, which was one big frustrating thing. It doesn't help with like instantiating a new notebook that has 1,000 code mirrors, because we still are instantiating 1,000 code mirrors. But it does help with the day-to-day interaction.
Only do the expensive operation when you activate that cell. So in general, we defer that as much as possible. The most expensive one is only done when you click on the cell.
So you're saying that we can render it statically, we just lose line numbers if those happen to be shown?
Or any other gutter, yeah.
What other gutters?
Like if you had a debug marker.
Yeah, we don't have them now. Code folding, for example, is another one that would be popular. Debugging, we can't support that right now anyway, but code folding would be another marker if we ever do like change marking and stuff like that.
I actually think that's an okay trade-off, in that the large notebook problem is something that affects all of our users right now, but those gutter type features, I think there's two parts of it. One is that lots of users don't use them, but the other is that even when a user is using them, it's not disastrous to have them only show up when they're editing the cell.
Yeah, I think I remember, again, beta is feature compatibility. In fact, 1.0 is feature compatibility as well. The existing notebook has those performance problems. We fixed JupyterLab to not have any more performance problems than the current notebook. I think we're fairly close to that.
It's pretty easy to open enough documents that the UI crawls to a halt.
Is it right now?
Yeah. In the last month.
Let's test it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's test it as of current master, and if it's still an issue, then we can relook at that.
Okay. Test. I've got my own list of things, and again, they're all up for discussion. Are there other things that anyone here can think of that wouldn't be represented in a beta tagged issue right now? That's sort of in the back of your head.
Nope, we've been trying to use it as intended.
Okay. Right. So, and then based on the current set of open issues tagged beta, does anyone want to guess or estimate when a beta might happen, plus or minus a month?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to be gone the next couple of weeks, so
that's totally fine.
Sort of hitting the road again in January would be. How many issues do we have open right now?
25.
Well, the ones that are blocked are being able to maximize in the dock panel. Fernando said he wanted that for beta, so that is a change to phosphor that has to go on that queue. The work Chris is doing right now is to make it to change the way we're packaging phosphor to avoid the lab extension compatibility problem we're having. It turns out that we were trying to bring individual modules and dedupe those after the fact, but that was too brittle. So we need to make things. We need to change the unit of measure to a package instead of a module.
Yeah.
So he's doing some refactoring to make that happen, and then we got to bring that into JupyterLab. So in my mind, that is, I think we want to have extensions working. We don't want to right out the gate say, yeah, the extension is brittle.
Yes.
So that's my minimum baseline. But if
Chris,
Fernando wants to hold to the dock panel resize, then that would come after this current refactor.
Yeah, I agree with you that.
Chris, can you speak to phosphor? I know you're on the line.
Yeah, what do you want to know about it?
Particularly maximizing a window and the layout restore, I think, was the other issue that came up.
No, I think we pushed the full layout restore to 1.0, and we said what we have now is good enough.
Okay. Well, just in general, the phosphor development.
Yeah. So what in particular, or are you wanting to know just about the layout restore and the window maximization, or?
And the restructuring, I guess, which would be the.
So restructuring is ongoing. Anybody that wants to follow the progress there can track the feature submodules branch.
Okay.
So that's I've gone through algorithms and collections so far, and continuing moving on. It's not too much work. I was doing some cleanup around the algorithms and collections, trying to make some things less complex, and try to unify some concepts around there between data structures and sequences and whatnot. But that's just general nitty-gritty cleanup that I don't need to. Anybody that wants to know can talk to me privately about that, because none of it's released yet, so none of it's official or final. In terms of window maximization or dot panel maximization and layout, save and restore, we still have a decision to make in terms of how we want to do dot panel maximization, whether we maximize a single panel or whether we maximize the tabbed group that the panel is contained within. And we'll need to make that decision also using the mindset that eventually we'll be able to tear off tabs into their own free-floating windows, free-floating browser, separate browser pop-up window type things. So I can't code that until we kind of make a decision on what we want the behavior to actually be. The layout, save, restore, that's just a matter of implementing it, and so that'll be the new year. So I can start on that in January.
Also, there's because what Chris is doing now isn't just repackaging, but there's some refactoring going on. There will be some cost to us switching to it because we'll be switching up some things in JupyterLab. It won't be as much as when we switch to the new Phosphor mono repo, but there will be something like that.
Yeah, but to be clear, the majority of the cost is literally just going to be changing imports.
Yeah.
APIs are largely 98% unchanged, so with the exception of import paths.
Okay. Right, which is something we wanted anyway to make the lab extension compatibility better.
Right. And that was your point, Steve, right? That we should have that before beta so that lab extension authors don't the next week have to switch their imports.
I think that's pretty important. So based on this, before we end, I'm wondering if everyone can give their rough guess on a beta timeline.
1 year from now. Just kidding. I've learned to play it really safe with timelines these days.
Feel free to play it safe, but
yeah.
Steve, what do you think?
Well,
this is plus or minus many weeks. I mean, and no one's going to hold us to this, but I just want to have a sense of where we're at.
Conservative would be end of February. Seems reasonable. Chris, does that jive with you?
I mean, the packaging will definitely be done by then, depending on what other features you want by February. Layout, save, restore, I can probably get that done by February, yeah. The maximization is really going to depend on when we make the decision about what we want the behavior to be. I don't want to just pick and then have nobody like it. I'd rather sit down and have maybe a special meeting to decide what we want that behavior to be.
Okay. Darian, Jason, any guesses? Estimates?
Totally out.
I think that there are. I think Steve's in the right ballpark, but that if everything goes without one of those bugs that takes forever to figure out because it's just insanity, then that makes sense. But occasionally we have these things where we're just like, wait, what is Monaco doing? Like that sort of thing, But yeah, I think that's the right ballpark.
Okay.
Yeah, I think based on the things that we control, mid to late February is a right ballpark. The CSS, the UI UX review is something that we aren't controlling, so So
Yep.
if you, yeah, I mean, that's sort of in your court. Yeah, I think mid to late February is a good ballpark.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Anything else that needs to be talked about on the recorded meeting?
Do we want to have this meeting next Friday or the Friday beyond that?
I probably won't make it either of those Fridays.
Okay, sounds like
Yeah,
I see
think
some
we
other
can
nods.
cancel till the first week in January.
Okay, sounds good. Everyone,
Ryan, if you want to ping me, I can be available to meet at some point next week. I'll be around. So
okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye, Internet.